to the research webinar, a paradigm shift in research embodied validity. Welcome to the webinar on the art and science of embodied research design. This webinar will explore the vital role of embodiment in research design based on a recently edited book by one of our presenters, Dr. Jennifer Tantia, who's a leader in somatics and embodiment research and dance therapy. And also Dr. Michael Changaris, who most of you might know or be familiar with, who also wrote a chapter on that. And before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to just say a couple of words about SEI and our research committee. So SEI is a 501(c) nonprofit organization. All funds from this webinar are donated and are used to fund research in somatic experiencing or somatic therapy. So the research committee came into being around December 2019, and we have a charter that we developed that's part of the strategic plan. And our mission really was started to develop a robust SE research program that supports best research practices, provides guidance for research through mentorship, and fosters collaboration. We have 4 standing committees: policy and strategy, fundraising and grants, mentorship and community building, and organizational collaboration. These standing committees are in various stages of development, and we have a number of activities that we have engaged in over this past period of time. So obviously we're doing these webinars and research salons, which you've seen advertised and which you're participating in now. We are developing a white paper, which will be a review of the evidence on somatic experiencing as seen through the lens of SE-informed psychotherapy. And the goal of that white paper is to stimulate dialogue and interest in research and make some recommendations for future research. We also developed the Peter Levine Research Awards. We have our first round of awardees, which will be given the awards at our conference, and that's another activity that we have. Our 2021 International Virtual Conference, where Peter will be presenting the first research awards. We will have a research roundtable that will demystify the research process. The white paper will be discussed. And so also we are starting a listserv. So if you're interested in joining our listserv and being part of our research base, Pat Sikora is going to put that in the chat for you. So just make sure it goes to the research at traumahealing.org email.
A minor note on that, that is for people who are interested in conducting research, not just hearing about outcomes of research.
Thank you, Michael. We are kind of a wild and crazy bunch on the research team. We have really exciting, interesting discussions, and we are really looking forward to engaging the community in the SE research. The purpose of which is actually to get this to be an evidence-based modality. And once it's an evidence-based modality, then we can move into trying to get it reimbursed, sort of along the lines that what chiropractic did, or EMDR, or trauma-informed CBT. So anyway, let me now introduce our wonderful panelists. First of all, thank you so much for your time and efforts today. Jennifer Frank Tantia is a private practice somatic psychologist and dance movement therapist in New York City. She has taught somatic psychology and embodied research at many universities and has guest lectured internationally. Dr. Tantia served as a grant adjudicator for the 1918 NEA Research Artworks Commission, that's the National Endowment of the Arts, and has served on the boards of both the United States Association for Body Psychotherapy and the American Dance Therapy Association. Dr. Tantia peer reviews for 7 academic journals and has authored several dance and movement therapy and somatic psychology publications. She recently received a Marianne Chase Foundation grant for her latest book, The Art and Science of Embodied Research Design, which was published in November of 2020. It's a fabulous book. I highly recommend it. Dr. Michael Changaris is the Chief Training Officer, Health Psychology Group's Program Lead and Psychopharmacology Rotation Lead for the Wright Institute Integrated Health Psychology Training Program, which is an APA-accredited training internship in health psychology. He's an adjunct professor with the John F. Kennedy University at the Wright Institute. Dr. Changaris is a clinical health psychologist with a specialty in multicultural psychology, stress physiology, and neuroanatomy of PTSD. He is also a 2018 UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, California Healthcare Foundation Leadership Fellow. He currently serves on the Health Disparities Committee at Contra Costa County Health, and along with the team was recognized with the 2018 Health Partnership Award for his work addressing implicit bias in healthcare. I also want to say, for those of you who know Michael, that he's a past board chair and has been on the board for 7 years, and amazing amounts of service to SEI, and he'll be transitioning off in July, unless we nail both of his feet to the floor, and even then he'll probably still transition off, but we're going to miss him in that capacity, but we know he'll still be around. If you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, and we will monitor that for our discussion. So welcome, everybody.
So welcome, everybody. And Jennifer, first of all, just Michelle, I want to say thank you. Michelle is the incoming chair for the SCI board and is an incredibly powerful leader and has been such a gift to us all in so many ways. I'm really looking forward to seeing the impact of your leadership over the next year, and then having been just grateful for your leadership and what you've brought to forth. She's lifted the conference not entirely on her own shoulders, but she's been a big part of the lift of the conference that's coming up, and I'm really grateful for it.
Definitely not all on my own, I'll say that. Lots of help from people.
I feel really grateful to work with you. And Jennifer, I just know that we've had such a good, I always feel like when we get together, it's like playmates getting together, making good trouble, as John Lewis would say, you know. It feels like our field is at a place where embodiment is incredibly needed. We have a fairly disembodied world, and it's hard to treat the world badly or other people badly when you're more connected with yourself. And so there's a way where, as I look at embodiment, it's asking us to be differently in the world. And so I'm really excited to do this talk, because one of the things that having spent time in somatics and in an embodiment research world, is I've realized that embodiment has something to say about how we conduct research itself, the kind of questions we ask, the way we approach problems, the way we think about what a solution could even look like. And that it's asking for us to make a radical shift and building in the interior experience of self and how all of systems are developed. Do you want to say anything or riff on that before I move in?
No, you're spot on. This is yes, we're on the same track, and that was for me kind of the end of the seminar. So starting there, I guess we're going to open up all kinds of new stuff today while we're talking.
Yeah, we will open up some good box, and I know that we'll have some fun going back and forth.
Yeah.
Both Jennifer and my schedules are fairly busy, but we had so many I haven't laughed as much in months as I did in our planning for this. Thank you for that. So our objectives for today are, we're going to explore the importance of embodiment in research design. We're going to gain some skills for incorporating embodied design into both qualitative and quantitative research. We're going to look at what disembodiment errors are in research. So research tries to deal with places where systematic error can enter into people's thinking. And embodiment is a place where systematic error has been there because of fundamental denial about the way that the body plays out and how life happens. And so we're going to know some core ways that that embodiment can transform research and ways of knowing. And we're going to deepen our capacity to build embodiment principles into research in a six-step process that I've looked at, that I've outlined in my chapter. And Jennifer is going to talk in many ways about some of the vision for the field. As someone who's been leading this for quite some time, I'm really excited to hear her thoughts and deepening together. And wow, I just want to say it's nice to see Mariana from Mayo Clinic, wellness trained coach, brain spotting, 2 years of clinical massage. That's wonderful. Allison from UK. Yes, the slides will be made available, and we'll look forward to sharing them with you. So I'm going to ask you to stop introducing yourselves in the chat for just a minute. And at the end of this talk, we're going to put together a word cloud. What I would love you to do is, if you don't mind, put in 3 words each for everybody that's here. And the words related to what do you feel, what do you think, what do you respond to when you hear the words embodied research design? And we're going to make a word cloud and present that a little later. So just plop those in the chat. And in the back end, Rebecca Schwartz, who did not show her face, and Pat Sikora, who is our fearless guide and leader on the research team, will help kind of get that coalesced into a word cloud that we'll share with y'all. So go ahead and put in 3 words in the chat that you can say that say relate to embodied research design. All right, and I'll let y'all just do that. Dynamic, whole, and innovative. Yes, that's beautiful. Paradox, finally. Yes, I love that. Subjectivity. Yes, exactly. I think paradox is a great frame for the beginning. Connection, integration, human, relief. Yes, creative, presence, curious, and I don't recognize the other one. Aesthetic. Yes, thank you for saying it. Oh, Jennifer put that in. I was going to say Jennifer. Integration, sensory depth, dignifying, intimate. That's right. That there isn't really a separation. That, you know, we talk about the human as having a brain, but does any human brain exist outside of relationship with other human brains? I mean, talk about what an infant would look like if it wasn't reared by another adult, you know? Felt sense, integral, relational, comprehensive. Yes, that's powerful. Mind as emerging property. Ooh, I like that. That gives me chills. Self-led, whole self communication, integration, cohesive, and connection. That's beautiful. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. Connection, intuitive, and human. Experience, subjective, and real. Yes, that's it. That's it. And as you're listening today, encompassing connection and full. That's beautiful. That is, I love that one. Yeah, that's really rich. Balanced relations, mind. Ooh, juicy. All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit. I want to just tell a story to frame why embodiment matters. My undergraduate in psychology was in cognitive psychology. I remember sitting in a cognitive psychology class and they're talking about training rats when this very odd study came up. Psychologists had gotten to a place where they were training rats in this very lovely way, do all kinds of random, wonderful, deep things. And that's why The Rats of Nim probably came into existence, which was a favorite book as a child. So learning about rats was not that upsetting. But these cognitive scientists had decided that they were going to try to teach a rat to sit in a chair. And I remember thinking about that and it failed, of course, because there's a different body there. Rats don't sit in chairs. They don't have the same body shape. They don't have the same motion. They don't have the same elegance in the way that their hips move. They have a different elegance. And that's the thing about embodiment. Later, I remember listening to Temple Grandin talk about her experience with watching cattle and seeing that cattle's experience of the world was different from most humans. And humans didn't anticipate the impact of a glint of light or a shadow. And those glints of light and those shadows, small inner experiences from the cow perspective, led to vast increase in assault on the cows and aggression, and led to cows having deep discomfort. Now, I'm personally a vegetarian, so I don't eat the cows anyway, but at the same time, knowing that the cows are having a little less suffering from someone just looking from the perspective of the cow, I thought was a powerful place for us to look at what embodiment means. And that when you look from the place of embodiment, you start to think differently. I was in the emergency department maybe 10 years ago, and I just had something to get taken care of, and it was 4 a.m. before they got to me. And I was starving and I was tired, and then they checked my blood pressure. Been up all night, starving, exhausted. You know what my blood pressure was, right? No one looked at that blood pressure and thought, here's a starving, tired guy with blood pressure. They offered me a blood pressure medicine. I didn't have a blood pressure problem at that time. What does the human experience look like in medicine, in science, in psychology? Some clinics, when you walk in, there's double pane, bulletproof glass windows. What is that like for an embodied self? So let's just take a moment and think about those things as we move forward. And I'll just give two more little metaphors to anchor us as we're going into this conversation today. One of them is a study of bioavailable energy. Researchers took two groups of people. They gave them both a pink liquid that looked identical. One of the groups, they put a little sugar in that pink liquid. And then they had both groups rate how prepared and how capable they were to accomplish a task. The group that had had the pink liquid with the sugar felt like they could accomplish the task more because they had the bioavailable energy of the sugar in their body. Of course, this is science, so it wasn't 100%, it wasn't 1-to-1, but it was statistically significant and meaningfully significant. How many research studies don't carry into their work the need for understanding the physicality of human embodiment? Another study had people rate the steepness of a hill, and they had one group rate it just looking at a picture of a hill, and they had another group rate it looking at a picture of a hill, imagining they had a friend standing with them. The felt experience of imagining you have a friend standing with you doing a complicated talk like this, hashtag Jennifer, or Dr. Thompson, makes the work seem lighter. It makes it seem more possible. And literally people perceive the hill as less steep. And so that's what we're talking about today. Embodiment has ways where it can create systematic errors and systematic bias that could fundamentally damage research if you do not have embodied validity, fold it into how research is conducted. We're going to be talking about that today. So I'm going to frame a few more ideas and how I think about this. And this is emerging of some of the cognitive science in embodiment from embodied cognition, some of the systems theory, which points at how every system is a body in and of itself. And believe me, I would love to talk about the way that an ecosystem becomes its own version of embodiment in a self, and that selves are nested. If anybody's interested, there's a great discovery in 2020 using information theory to talk about nesting relationships of self. Would love to share it, but I realize it's a little bit geeky for most people wanting to be around. So I will not go into those details, but happy to share them if anybody's interested. Great talks and little lectures. But when I look at embodiment, we break it into three parts. Embodiment is always situated. It means that it is context dependent. So in most research studies, they try to pull out all of the context. And what I'm saying is that context matters. It's a part of what's going on. There's a specific time, a specific place, a memory, a working model, a history that's created by the continuity of the change in self. You may wonder why I would have a picture of a couple sitting there on the bench in an obvious argument with one holding the umbrella over the other one, even though they're obviously not happy with each other on that particular day. And the reason is that a couple's relationship can't be understood without the history. There's been enough love over time between these people that one would want to support the other person, even though he's obviously frustrated. History matters, context matters, thought matters. And when we know those things matter, we can know that when you talk about an experience, you don't pull the animal or the person out of it. So in rat studies, they found that rat handling made a big difference in how a rat performed in studies. And rat handling was based on whether a rat handler, the researcher, liked rats and was kind to them and played with them. You got a vastly different study if a researcher enjoyed and played and had a connection between animal and human with the rat. Embodiment matters. Embodiment is state dependent, and states often act like a filter on behavior. If I'm in a fight or flight state and you ask me to solve a problem, I'm going to be more fear-based. I'm going to be more parts focused. I'm going to be more us versus them. If you ask me to do that when I'm in a ventral vagal state, I'm going to be more we us. I'm going to be more curious. If you ask me in a freeze state, I'm going to be more not possible, more giving up, more shutdown. And systems all have states. So if you look at the Krebs cycle, and how cells function on the inside, if you come towards that Krebs cycle in one state, it's different than in another. And to put this in concrete dollars and cents, activity-dependent neuroplasticity is a big deal in how brains learn how to fire together and wire together. And that literally means that when you have one neuron firing, if it has an impact on that other neuron within a tiny little window, microseconds, it makes them wire together. If it doesn't happen in that exact microseconds, they don't wire together. And it's that timing of the system, that state in the system, how the system itself is a flow between this to that, to this to that, that if you don't deal with that, you don't know. One of the questions in Alzheimer's research that I find myself asking regularly is, what would happen if you changed the timing of administering an acetylcholine drug? The time when the brain basically uses the most acetylcholine is when you're asleep. It produces it during REM sleep. Most of the time we give acetylcholine drugs in Alzheimer's during the day. Would it be different? No one's asked. It might make a big difference. But because no one has the embodiment in mind, that system state in mind, we don't end up asking questions that are important. And the other big one is embodiment is simulating. This person here, sitting holding the rain umbrella over his sweetheart, is simulating the future with his partner in his mind. He's simulating his own state. He's simulating the end of the argument. She is simulating their connection, how it's going to be and how that discussion is going to go, what it's like working through. Now, the deepest level, we talk about working models or theory of mind and how we have this for other people. But simulations happen at very simplistic level. I have a simulation that if I pick up this pen, I can hold it here. And I have a simulation that your mind is seeing it and having a relationship with this thing and being able to interpret that when I held it up, you called it a pen too in your mind. Our brains and systems are always simulating. And if I have a simulation based on my experience, let's say I've had experiences of trauma and I walk into a building for a research study, that simulation may play out differently if that person greets me with a flat face and I have trauma. I'm going to interpret that in terms of maybe being more angry or more fearful than if I didn't. The way we simulate the world is different. And so these three core aspects of how embodiment works can really drive how we think about research and how we think about research studies. And so when I look at embodied validity, it's this core idea. It is, and I realize that this is me as one person with Jennifer and lots of dialogues around what this means, trying to throw an idea against the wall. So please make it better, because I definitely don't think this is it, but it's one definition here. It's the degree to which embodiment is incorporated into the research question, study design, methods and results and conclusion, and in a way that mitigates disembodied errors, the errors that pull a self and a human out of context, in a way that enhances reliability and generalizability of data outcomes. Jennifer, you're making a big smile like you're thinking something. I want to hear what that thought is if you're willing. I don't want to put you on the spot though.
Every time I read or heard you say disembodied errors, it just makes me laugh, like with glee. It's changing the paradigm even through the words themselves. That it's not that there's that, theory of mind is the end of it, right? It's I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in a quote that I have, but instead of by calling them disembodied errors rather than mind is correct, kind of thing. It's so lovely. It just kind of comes from a different perspective, and that's what I think is part of what we're building today and what we're sharing today.
Yeah, and I think in some way, like this dialogue emerged out of a webinar we did together. Like, what was it, like 8 years ago now?
2015, I found it.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad webinar, but I think we've grown a lot since then. Isn't it fun to see how this has developed? I'm not going to go too deep on this because I think it's maybe the least interesting thing, but I'll make sure that you have the references for these so that you can look it up if you want. The first is just a reminder that, Descartes' error. The brain actually is not the point. The body is the point and the brain is how it gets around. And they're in these deep dialogues together. And if you haven't read the book, A Brain with a Mind of Its Own, it's a really good book. And it's fun, and the writer is great and very literate. And it's one of those good science reads that blows your mind in many, many, many ways. Also to bring up Damasio in this. Damasio is such an architect of how we understand the world and how our brains work. And of course, there's convergent and divergent zones of development in neurons where, like, the information goes in, converges on a neural packet, the neural packet then diverges out, and that's how we retrieve and get memory. And there's a large part of the embodied self that, like, I'm not just one embodied self, I'm many, and those kind. But leaving all of that aside, I'll just remind us of one of his one of his case studies where he was talking to somebody who was a legal expert, brilliant at the law, well respected, had damage to one of the core areas of affect-based right brain processes. And what they lost was the ability to emotionally tone the physical, like that feeling of like, man, I just don't want to do that. And they couldn't make decisions. Their legal thinking was still spotless. Their intelligence was still spotless. But this gentleman could sit with a calendar for an hour, not being able to make a calendar date. As a dyslexic person, I feel related to that, but it's for different reasons. But the lawyer who still had the same intelligence, still had the same capacity, still had the same legal reasoning, lost almost all of his functioning, not able to work because of that inability to feel the felt aspects of his experience. And then just embodied cognition is quite powerful, and it's, of course, there's always critiques of something, but it's more than 4 decades old. Talks about how the way that our thinking and our knowledge and our ideas themselves are rooted in bodily experiences. So like even a word freedom has embodied components to it, even though it's highly abstract. And you don't have to believe me, you read a poem that uses the word freedom in it, and it changes the context based on the connotation and the denotation. And part of what happens when I say the word freedom in a good sense is my chest opens. If I say the word freedom around areas where I feel freedom is being taken, my chest closes. There are parts about freedom of that opening and closing that are in the word itself. I've mentioned that information theory, and I'll share some of those things. And then we'll continue to talk about embodied research design, but the book that Jennifer curated is a really incredible book. There's lots of great thinkers, and I would just encourage you to look at it and deepen with it. Nope, this is me again. I was getting tired of me talking, so I'm going to go through this fast. So the basics here is that if you ignore embodied research at your own peril, one of the most grotesque versions of this, I was watching an MIT researcher talk about rats in a maze, mats in a rave. No, that's a mats in a rave. That would be very funny. Rats in a maze, and it was one of those water mazes that the water looks milky and the rat has to find its area. And they were rats that had some damage to their hippocampus. And one of the statements from that I found very deep was that some of the rats, even without the hippocampus, would find and remember the maze. And his comment to that was, the brain is highly able to do workarounds and creative structures. That happens a lot. And I thought that was just a throwaway line for him, but it was incredibly beautiful. But one of the lines that hit me like a punch in the stomach was someone asked him if they were all male rats. And he said, yes, because the female physiology was too complicated. And my response to that was, no, the female physiology is the point. And so what we found was this is an article that was done on women in medication research. And they found that of the 86 medicines in the 5,000 articles they reviewed, 76 of them found higher amounts of gender adverse events in the medicines after they were studied. And that things like metabolism, things like how a medicine was impacted by pharmacokinetics, right? Where it's just how the body does to the drug. And then, nope, flipped it. Nope, that's right. Pharmacodynamics is what the drug does to the body. So the body has an impact on the drug, and and women's metabolism was different than men. And almost none of the studies actually included women in their cohorts for that same argument that MIT researcher has. It's saying that the embodied reality of the female body didn't matter in research. And to me, it's gross and it's crazy. It's off. We need to actually look at and not talk about disembodying research to get reductionism, but to build the appropriate level of holism into research and study what you're actually studying. Another one is a moral and ethical decision-making. A group of individuals who were read what would be perceived as moral violations. They had a higher physiological disgust response, higher self-report of anger, and higher moral disapproval if they hadn't had a sandwich that day, if they were hungry, if they had less bioavailable energy in their body. And we'll talk about this later, but environment enrichment and addiction. A team took a group of cocaine-exposed rats that would normally display all the display behaviors of addiction in rats. And they found that after 30 days in an enriched environment, things like place-based preference of drug use, behavioral sensitization to cocaine were not reduced, were eliminated. And so when we look at what the embodied experience of a rat in an environment that makes a rat happy was, that it actually made the drugs not just less attractive, but reduce the addiction. My question is, what are we doing to people by not looking at embodiment? And now I get to pass to Jennifer and not talk anymore. That was much longer than my intention was.
Wonderful. Mike, thank you so much. It's just so exciting to see the depth of everything that you have found. And and thank you for inviting me to be here. It's so exciting to be talking about this. It's almost like, you know, when you find the area that you want to study and what you want to get your doctorate in, it's like, or your master's in, and it's like, oh, I get to just look at this. And that's how I feel about today. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I couldn't believe how much fun it was to to revisit all this.
Yeah, I'm like
So
a kid in
thank
the
you
candy
for
shop
that.
today. Thank you, I agree.
And thank you for Mike for writing the first chapter of the book. It is a pillar that really brings a very strong beginning to the whole rest, the way the rest of the whole book opens up afterwards. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all this kind of stuff and how it came to be, and starting with a little bit of my thoughts from, you know, why use embodied methods. And this was the along the lines of disembodied errors, which I just love the way that that's phrased. Sheets Johnstone also had said, infants are not pre-linguistic, as is commonly declared. On the contrary, language is post-kinetic. And, you know, we are on this earth for about 3 years before we have any cognitive memory whatsoever. But it doesn't mean that we don't have memory. We have body memory. We have sensory motor memory that goes in. And those of you who study or have gotten your SEP and studied somatic experiencing, it bypasses here and goes straight into here. So, you know, there's so much information that we can learn from our embodied attention to our embodied experience. So in writing about this earlier on, my colleague Tomoyo Kawano and I and Robin Cruz in this article tried to create, you know, tried to talk about and codify or try to put into words, you know, why use embodied methods. And it's the other quote we have here is, embodied methods bring implicit knowledge into conscious awareness so that an experience can be more fully described and understood. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But if you think about the body as the gateway between consciousness and unconsciousness, if we bring attention to our body in a certain way with curiosity and interest and open-mindedness without judgment, the body responds. And that information comes forward, and I'll talk a little bit about that, what that information is a little bit later. And the other piece here is, by inquiring through embodied experience, and probably most people who are here today know what that means. The participant or researcher, depending on who is doing this, taps into rich resources of corporeal experience, opening possibilities that are not available through cognition alone. So this is that kind of, Mike, I think you were saying how a certain word like freedom, there's a response from the body from the way that we use our words. And then what I was trying to do kind of on the converse is, well, what are those words that are, how do we have the experiences and how do we put words to those experiences that come through? So one of my favorite pictures, this is kind of like a meta graph or something. What do you call it? A picture, what's it called? A figure. Sorry, it's 3 o'clock for me, so I'm in this, like, my brain is on the down, like, and ending the day, so I'm trying to get my energy
It's
back
the worst
up again.
embodied time, 3 o'clock for brain
It's the
functioning.
state specific, along with my age. So we look at thoughts. So this is, why embodied validity matters. Why does it matter that we put embodiment or embodied experience or study embodiment or bring an aspect or aspects of embodiment to the research process? And if you look at this glacier, if we look at where it says thoughts, that's the part that we know, right? That's the part that's conscious. And then emotions, I should have moved it up just a tiny bit. If you can see that little meniscus along, it's kind of, there's sometimes emotions for those of you who are clinicians, it's kind of unconscious, and then you can bring it to consciousness if you slow down. And then look at the embodied stuff that we have to work with that we don't even know is there most of the time until we bring attention to it. And I think what I'm saying, Mike, is just kind of supporting everything that you've said so far. It's like, there's so much information that we just don't know until we look. So, and I may come back to this a little bit later. So just try to keep this picture in mind. Going to the next slide, I want to talk about an example of how an embodied approach can change the research question. This is just a little sample because we can talk about data analysis, we can talk about data collection. There could be like a whole workshop on either of those, like just on that. So just kind of talking about a sliver of that, of how an embodied approach can affect a research question. So if we go to the next slide. So if we're looking at, this is a study that was done by Boyle, Marshall, and Robeson. And they were looking at, they did a phenomenological study on 4th grade girls and boys. It's called Gender at Play, 4th grade girls and boys on the playground. And that was published in American Behavioral Scientists. It's at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it. It's too small for me to read it. It's down there. And so I'm just as an example, I took the research question and I took one of the verbatim responses from one of the little girls, from a 4th grade girl. And so the qualitative question was, how do adolescent girls experience attention from boys in a playground environment? And if you just ask them and they tell you and you write it down, you get this. He punched my arm and ran away, so I chased him. I think he likes me. Now, from a therapist perspective, I'd be like, whoa, there's like stuff missing in there. So if we turned it into, and so what I did was I took that example from the actual study and I filled in kind of my own angle on this. And so I changed the question, and of course I looked at it again. I was like, oh, I want to change it again. But it says, how do adolescent girls perceive attention from boys, and what meanings are made from their embodied experiences? Just a little bit more in there. So then if we were to slow down and go from this speed of the mind and the answers and the thoughts and how quickly our thoughts go, and we slow down to the tempo, to the speed, to the quality of the body. If we were to get this little girl, this 4th grader, to do this, because she would be excellent at it, she would say something like this, and this is made up. He punched my arm and it hurt. Oh, because she felt the hit and paid attention to her own body. Then I felt excited. Well, that's weird, because he looked at me, I was seen, and then he ran away. And I mean, that's an attachment issue already starting. Then she says, my arm hurt, but I chased him anyway. I wanted to hurt him back, but also wanted to kiss him. Then there's more questions coming from that. If we were to go with the left side of the slide here, and just, he punched my arm, ran away, I chased him, I think he likes me, we're missing out on her embodied experience. And of course, I know the little boy has all his embodied experience of guilt and fear and all those other things. But we can find out more of what's going on. We can also support her in having an experience that may be conflicting but to actually tease them out rather than allow something that may, this sounds kind of crazy, but I'm going to say it anyway, teach her how to be in a domestic abusive environment. So this is just, it's just an idea. It's just a thought. And so that's one of the examples. And there's another one that I might bring up later from something else that I wrote before. But this was like just why we need to really pay attention to what's going on under the water in the rest of the glacier, the unconscious that can be brought to consciousness through the body.
I now want to like almost like run this study with a regular qualitative design and an embodied qualitative design and just see the difference in the answers. I feel it would be so inspiring. Thank you, Jennifer. This is amazing.
Yeah. So to continue on from the validity piece, and if we're going to look at and bring embodiment into the research, into research design, you know, how do we describe it? We have to find words for this messy stuff that comes up. And when you, and I'm going to break it down for everybody a little bit later. And it was one of the chapters that I wrote called Embodied Data, to find out what exactly is this stuff? How do we name it? How do we categorize it? And then what do we do with it? So early on, one of the earliest embodied descriptions that I could find was from William James, who called it a blooming, buzzing confusion. And I think it was Daniel Stern who ran with that and wrote The Interpersonal World of the Infant. My books are over there. And so it's so into what's a blooming, buzzing confusion. My gosh, you know, there's so much in there. If you just put it into an image, if you put it into there's sound, if you put it into there's movement, there's a thought that's not quite formed. There's, you know, so I can go on forever. A few other descriptions of embodiment. Rosemary Anderson, who also contributed a chapter to the book, she says, embodiment is not commensurate with our physical senses. It's not what the body feels like, but what the body is experiencing at a given moment. And I say that, or I hold that here because there's more to it than physical. But then what's that? Is it body, mind, or is it something that is the amalgam of that actually is bigger than some of its parts? And then I took my hand at it and tried to do this. So the most recent statement that I wrote was embodiment is the state of awareness. It's a state of awareness, and I also call it a state and a process, but that's another thing. For a state, it's a state of awareness in which sensation, posture, gesture, thought, and emotion are simultaneously experienced in the present moment. Somebody once said, you know, thoughts can only happen when thoughts cannot, you know what I'm talking about? But experience can. Thoughts can't have more than one thought at a time, but experience can have more than one thing at a time. And then, so the other piece is in a process. So the state is the first statement, and then the last quote here is embodiment is a process. If mindfulness is the act of attending to one's body, embodiment is the enlivened response to that attention. And the enlivened response comes through not in words, but in sensations and all the other stuff that I talked about that I'm going to open up a little bit in the next couple slides. So embodiment, embodied data. Let me give you a definition for embodied data here. Embodied data are points of unconscious information brought to consciousness by attending to oneself in the present moment. Embodied data are points of unconscious information brought to consciousness by attending to oneself in the present moment. And another piece that I wanted to add here is when I did my my doctorate in on the topic of intuition, clinical intuition, and I found words like illogical, unconscious, irrational. And what I thought was, this is impossible. How can you study something that's ill and non and un? And so I said, well, let's give it some words that actually are, that have some body. Words like creative, active, aesthetic, dynamic, kinetic. So starting to form words that have substance. So with embodied data, there are also, keep going back and forth with my notes. The embodied data, what's the size of the sensation that you're feeling, or the size of your body? Sometimes your body feels bigger, sometimes it feels smaller. What kind of gravity does this sensation have? Is there a temperature change, which many of you may be very familiar with? What's the visceroceptive change that might be happening? How does your breathing change? How does your gastrointestinal activity change? What about heart palpitations? What's happening with your HRV, which I don't know if you can feel that, but you know, you can find it. When we are looking at these things, you know, another way of, the way that I'm just going to say, I'm organizing these and it's all kind of mushy and I'm trying to make sense of it. And I invite you to look at this stuff and go, oh no, I think it's this way and I can categorize it like this. This is the reason that I wrote this book, is it was a ground for everybody to just like kind of tear it apart and keep growing on it. And Mike, you said something earlier about that, like, this is an idea, and please take it and challenge it and tear it apart and put it back together and add to it. So everything here, same thing. It's just a beginning. So with embodied data, we're talking about visceroception, gravity, shape, weight, texture. And then there's also, in dance movement therapy, for any of you who are studying over there, I think I saw somebody in the chat who said they're studying, is movement. And that's a whole nother ball of wax. So if we go to the next slide, movement as embodied data, spontaneous movement, which is different than dance, twitching, change in breathing, which can show movement, yawning, posture, which is your architecture of your body. It also can also be coordinated, or the opposite of coordinated, contrasting with an emotion, you know, depending on the degree of integration of the individual. Gestures. I have Italian heritage. I cannot speak if I don't move my hands. I apologize if it's throwing anybody off. It's all up here. Rhythm and speed, two different ways of observing movement. Rhythm is how the movement repeats itself, and the speed is how fast or slow it's going. So there's a whole world of movement as embodied data that's also part of this amalgam of stuff that we can organize and codify and put into themes. So again, for the, you know, I have to say, I wasn't really sure who was going to be here today. And so I'm guessing that most people here are SE, either have gone through SE or are practitioners of SE. So, you know, some of you would be very familiar with this kind of language: buzzy, tingling, heavy, open. These are kinds of words that are, like I like to call them aesthetic or creative or kinetic. The kind of words that are that really contain all of the aspects of a person's experience, a sensory experience that then has a thought or a word or maybe a memory or obviously sensation. So this vocabulary is just invaluable to doing embodied work.
I think so too. Can I share a small story? I don't want to interrupt you. Is it okay?
Yeah, please.
But it was really touched by, I was in group last night and somebody was in group and we did like a video of watching a mindfulness, and I'd done another one in the last week that people didn't like as much. And one of the things they said that they liked about the person, the woman who was running the video this week, was they said, it feels like she's feeling it with us when she talks about it. It feels like she's embodying her words. And I thought, when you're showing these words, I was like, the word buzzy has this movement to it, but how much do we embody those words when we're talking to each other about it? And does it make a big difference? It feels like it does to me, but I don't think we've answered the question, because we don't have enough of embodiment in the research design itself.
Huh. Are you talking about when someone is describing their experience?
Yeah, are they in contact with the felt experience of description as they're describing it, rather than describing it as an intellectual articulation?
I think these words are often a giveaway for that. When somebody is saying to
Wow,
me,
I got you.
"Oh, I feel lighter now," and I'll say, "Really?" I'll say, "Well, where do you feel it?" In my head, I guess. Wait, whoa. So I say, "Well, see if instead of thinking about it," or I'll say, "Well, go check, go take a moment and check and see if that's." You said, lighter, I guess. No, go check and see. Is it actually? Are you actually feeling it? Um, and when I'm asking a client, when I'm working with somebody, I'm asking them to sense themselves. I'll say, try not to imagine it, try to sense it. And we have to slow down, and I teach them how to get in there. You can see when they are embodied. Can you see when they're embodying it? I bet most of us here can. Yeah.
Yeah, and it
So,
almost reminds me of that Ginlin word, like talking to the eye beyond the eye. That
mm,
sense of really when you're contacting someone's
yeah.
deeper connection with themselves.
And that also speaks to, if you're going to do an embodied interview, you have to really be able to, you have to have done the work yourself, and then also be able to hold the participant to their experience, and help them, invite them, and also hold it with them, maybe even. So that's another piece. That's the interview part that,
Wow.
um,
And that's in
yeah.
your chapter, right?
Yeah, that's in the chapter on the body focused interview.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, can you say a little bit about him, or do you know much about him? Because I didn't get to meet him. I just wanted to highlight his chapter a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. So Wolf, I met him a very long time ago. And we actually just did a seminar, or a workshop, I don't know what you call it, talk, for CIIS not too long ago. And he's a researcher. He's at SF San Francisco, SFSU, is it?
Yeah, it's a great school.
Um,
Bless you.
and he's been working on this multi-dimensional assessment of interoceptive awareness for a very long time. And I, just like you, I had invited him to offer a chapter, because I thought his work has been, he's been doing it for a long time, and he gets to do this all day long. It's really cool. And so he's
Incredible.
been testing this inventory, so that it can be used in embodied research, and testing it in different ways. And at this point, he's now expanded it. So what he did, in order to test an instrument, he would test it out, and then he would go back and find out what was wrong with it and what were the errors. And he's been doing this for several years now. They've now gotten to a point where they're testing it cross-culturally, to see if there's anything that needs to be shifted, or what the commonalities are. So that's where he is in this. It's a whole journey, and you can find all of his previous studies on this very assessment tool, online. I think you can actually access the MAIA online as well.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. And this particular chapter is a really powerful one, and I found his work exciting. And I just wanted to highlight it because there's a lot of great chapters in this book, but there's only so much time to do in this talk. But
Mm.
but what I really loved was how he talked about the body and embodiment is more flexible and bigger than proprioception than interoception. He says we have a brain-centered, cognitive-centered way of viewing the world, and proprioception expands that a little bit, but even that has such an outward focus that it misses the interior aspect. And that embodiment itself is more than that. It's actually the inclusion of the proprioceptive awareness in space, the interoceptive awareness of self state, and then the presence that brings them all together into a whole. And what I loved about that is that it starts to, in an operationalized, solid, structured way, help us measure these ways where I have felt at times fragmented. After a big grief, I feel like my interoceptive awareness is a little shattered. My sense of self is not as whole. And as I move through that grief, there's a different weaving together of that awareness of self into a bigger whole, you know? And I just love this chapter and how it talks about it. And then he also points out how embodiment drives health, and that it's a vital for understanding some of the biopsychosocial models. And it's missing from the general biopsychosocial model that we've all been trying to use for years. And if you don't steep it in the body, you miss the political, individual, and social aspects of this work.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything else on this before I move?
Nope.
So we're going to do a poll now. Dion, it'd be great if this is the perfect time to launch it. And what I'd love to do is just go ahead and answer. Do you have any research projects you're working on? Yes, no, or maybe, and either on or want support with. And
I like the many option. I have many.
yes. Yeah, I have a lot of babies. They're on my little
I have one sitting over there with a bunch of data. I've got like 15 over here that I want to do.
Yeah, that is so accurate. Yeah, right now I'm like, I'm looking for the 2-hour block to write up a results section on something. Oh, Deborah Clydesdale says not yet, but she has one around the corner. That's incredibly wonderful. Thank you, Deborah. I've really appreciated being with you over the years, and I look forward to leading with you more as we go into this. And so we have 4 people with many, 41% so far, 39% with none, but that's totally fine. If you're interested, let us help you get interested and make ideas real. And 10 or 43% have said, yes, it's going up. We have 11 that say yes. That's great. That's really wonderful. So I'm going to give it just another maybe 10 seconds, get your last little votes in. We only have 48% of the polls are in. So if you have thoughts, it'd be great to have it.
Either.
Is it many or maybe? It should be many, but it could be maybe. I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now, going once, going twice, sold. And here are the results, everybody. So I just wanted to share with y'all that this is who we are right now, and how wonderful it is. And I would feel that a lot of us often feel separate and alone and in these small little silos fighting for embodiment in maybe places that aren't all that supported. I know in my SE research dissertation, my chair and my reader were good people and not unsupportive of me, very supportive of me, but did not get the work that I was doing. You know?
Me too.
Yeah. Yes, I think that might have been our first bond, was over that conversation. And when
that's why I wrote the book. I was in this silo and I was like, I wonder if there are other people out there who are also doing this. And they came from all over, all different countries and different backgrounds or different disciplines. It was amazing. So
yeah, I love that. And I've had this fantasy about not just having these salons, but having there is a little bit of like a support group for people addicted to research. But no, that's not what I was thinking. I was more thinking like, would it be possible to get a group together that could support each other, get each other's back, and help uplift? Would it be interesting to have like monthly, kind of like sharing time, and kind of almost like what clinical's peer supervision is?
That's not what SEI is?
That is one of the things we're thinking about doing at SEI. There's a lot of things that
Nice.
we'll do. So if you would be willing and you have a project that you'd be willing to share or excited about, please drop it in the chat. And we would love to see that as we go forward. All right, so we're going to go into the next little bit. And so I'm going to pass to Jennifer on this one. And one of the reasons I want to pass to Jennifer is that over the years, Jennifer's been doing this for years at a very high level of leadership. And I just wanted to give her a chance to share where she visions us going. If we were to take her work and the work of all the people that she's kind of gathered around her, where could we go together?
Michael, there's another question from Hayum Bay. How might contemplative methodologies or any embodied movement discipline refine or cultivate specific phenomenological data? And then they mention an application. How might mindfulness, yoga, or dance contribute to a clinician's attunement with another?
It's like,
That's like 4 studies.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just pass to Jennifer and
Right.
That's going to take a while to answer.
Yeah.
Let me try to be concise. So dance movement therapy, if you're talking about, I don't know much about contemplative studies, but with dance movement therapy, there is a collection of research. There's extant research. And so, there are, and again, I'm just referring to the book because I just finished this and put it together. It's like the latest thing that I know is going on, is that, there's the Levine movement analysis, which is a system of movement analysis. There's Kestenberg movement profiles. So there are codified ways of looking at movement and codifying them so that they can be studied. There's a chapter on each in the book, and there's even a chapter that is an overview of 3 different systems of movement analysis, and it analyzes those 3. So those things are available. There's a little bit of information about, what it involves. I mean, there's training, just like any instrument. If you had to be trained in an instrument, you have to do that. You would have to do some Levine training. It's still not, it's not as stringent as, let's say, the AAI, let's say, or, some kind of instrument like that, or something you had to learn. So in movement, there are definitely potentials. There are systems in place for that. And then what was the second question from that?
There was another question about whether we offer guidance or consults around embodied research design. And and I think actually it's really our intention as a research committee to do that. So that's why if people have research projects and they have questions, we'd like to invite you to connect with us, so that we can either have you present on our committee meetings or do a webinar or talk with you directly about how we might facilitate that work. But also I said I would let the panelists answer that question. So if either of you want to add anything to that, please feel free.
No, I would also just say, Michelle, thank you for stepping in. You're such a brilliant researcher yourself, and I'm so grateful for your leadership, and I look forward to being together. So one of the things I also have in my chapter is a design process for how to think about designing a study. And I'm happy to share some of that with people. And I'm always happy to do consults. I do research consults all the time. So if you want to just reach to me, that's great, but then our team would be great. And I think that what we really need to do is come together and lift each other up as we go together in this field. So whatever way that we can get together and consult and co-grow and push each other to deepen would be absolutely wonderful. Yeah. Jennifer, do you want to, if we shift it over to you, sharing some of this work about your visioning, our path forward a little bit?
Well, I also just want to speak to the other question that somebody asked about clinicians. And Mike, I think you said at SEI, there's one of the groups is coordinating clinicians with researchers. Is that right? Did I hear that right?
That's right. Yeah, we are working on helping people with helping bridge that clinician to researcher pipeline connection, and trying to make help clinicians gain capacity to conduct research, even at like a simple level of like, let's just write up a case series, to a much more complex level of doing like a double blind, not a double, but a controlled study.
Yeah. So, the folks who didn't respond to the poll and aren't currently working on a study, just because you're a clinician doesn't mean you can't be involved in a research project. Where if you could be, the person providing the intervention, you're the expert in that, and to put that together with someone who wants to study it, or both want to study it, but they can put all the other stuff in place, do the data analysis. This is a wonderful way to move our embodied research forward. So talking about moving things forward, that's one way that would just be phenomenal. And any researcher that I've ever contacted, and I am a super geek, when I read Babette Rothschild's book, I actually emailed her and told her how wonderful it was, and she wrote back and said, "Thank you so much, that's so kind." And I'm like, oh my God, Babette Roth. So researchers are very open, interested people. It's their job to be interested in everything. So please don't ever feel like, oh, I can't do research because I'm a clinician. No, yeah, you can. And you have a lot of gifts to bring to the embodied research process.
And can I echo off that for a second? One of our research leaders who's been a professor at NYU for many years and a department chair out there, she's absolutely wonderful. She'll always say, clinical work is evidence. You're seeing it in motion, you're seeing it in action, you're watching it happen. And what we need to do is get clinicians the tools so they can turn their ideas into reality. I love her. She's so powerful and energetic.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, moving forward, well, that's a different question. That's different. I'm on the previous one. When what I was finding when I was writing my dissertation and I was teaching at the same time, and I was finding out that students were trying to put, so I guess these two slides are talking at the same time. I wanted to staple my my dissertation like end to end and make and I asked the research director if I could do this, and she said no. And so her name, we called her Dr. No. That was our nickname for her. So thank goodness she said no, because it forced me to do this. Because everything was connected all together for me. So even right now, I'm talking about two slides at the same time. And that is what I found is that students were trying to take this the traditional models of research and somehow talk about embodiment, but it wasn't getting to what they were actually looking for. So when I wrote my dissertation, I created a method because I was like, it doesn't work otherwise. I can't do this with paper. So I found a way to kind of, borrow from Jen Lin's focusing process, and I guess a little SE as well, as I'm thinking about it, and create an embodied interview. Now, when I did that, I was like, well, wait, I wonder if other people are doing this too. So I put out a call for papers and got 50 proposals in. The publishers, I said to the publisher, how many chapters do you want? And she said, 9. And I said, okay, how about 19? So I still have all these other chapters that haven't been utilized. But it's out there. So what I'm saying is that, what I would like to see is, this book is like, it's the base, it's the ground to build from. So look at it, tear it apart, build on it, and create your own. So that's what I wanted for this little book to then move and inspire people to do more of their own work, because we have to develop this before we can test it. What else can I say about this? So the way that embodied design challenges the models, we kind of already said it, how it's there are so many different topics that we can really explore with embodiment that doesn't really do it justice just with words alone. And Mike, if you could go to the slide with excuse me, there's like a whole list of oppression, gender, ability, diversity, embodied safety. I think it's in the, yeah, there it is. All of these different, words like fulfillment, comfort, different types of pain really needs to be explored. And I feel like I'm just preaching to the choir here now, explored through an embodied method. I don't know what else to say about that.
Well, I would say it's made me, this ability to be fine-tuned has made me a better clinician. I run pain clinics right now, and I can sit with somebody and get to the very fine-tuned nature of what pain really feels like. And what that allows us to do is build a healthier relationship with the pain. And that ability to talk about the embodied realities of it really is an anchor for deepening clinical work and deepening ways of knowing, when I only have a small language to describe my inner states, it makes an impoverished relationship with that inner state, you know?
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with research training, this is so, it, I see the researcher as the person who's on the table to actually walk the walk.
Yeah.
And do your own embodiment, have your own embodied experiences, do some kind of embodiment training before you're offering it to your participants. There's also, I'm not, I feel strange now. I feel like I'm advertising for the book, but it's like I said, it's the only thing that's like in my head right now. There are several chapters on reflexivity, the researcher's reflexivity, and how the researcher's embodied reflexivity can actually support the study and support the client or the participant in the training or in the actual process. So I mean, I have a feeling, we went from yoga being a big thing. Now everybody's sitting in meditation. If we start putting the two together, embodiment is going to be like, it's kind of the next thing, I think, as far as being more empathic, being more compassionate to yourself, being more relational, more present, and not, distanced from your present moment experience. So I really feel that an ethical and seasoned integrated researcher would be aware of their embodied experience while they're doing the research. That way you can find out your biases, you can see where the holes in your thinking is, and see where your blind spots are even. So
yeah, I love that. In a certain way, like all the focus on implicit bias in research is fundamentally saying we had errors of disembodiment. Our errors where we were not aware of how our bodies and our implicit system were creating judgments about the world.
Yeah.
And of course, addressing implicit bias isn't the only thing that changes bias. And maybe that's because we're trying to change implicit bias in a very disembodied way. Maybe what we need to do is change implicit bias to making it implicit connection. And that pathway of building a sense of safety gets us out of what would be in research on bigotry and bias, intergroup anxiety, and into intergroup connection, and building those safety across differences. I love that, Jennifer.
And even through the process, I am very technologically challenged, but I also see there's a Society for Artistic Research. They have a journal online. And right now it's visual research. Why don't we have videos of research online? This is going to be where you can see the researcher and I'm talking interviews because that's my angle, but to see the researcher as part of this research process is invaluable. And it lets the viewer or the reader or the witness to whatever you're watching really see what's going on.
I had a question. This is kind of a geeky one, kind of the research geeky one where, if you're trying to do research, you're trying to get grants and you're trying to get funding. And so I'm curious as to if you have recommendations or suggestions for how to, slip in so that it's really there and appropriate, but viable from a reviewer standpoint about how you do this research, because people would not necessarily really know what embodied research is or why it's important or what the heck we were doing anyway about this. But, somehow in the framing of the questions so that they're palatable to a more traditional model of research, say from NIH or different foundations. I think some foundations might be a little more broad-minded, but all the government sources are going to be pretty on the straight and narrow with this.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you had any suggestions about languaging or framing.
Off the top of my head, the quick and dirty way is to contact somebody who was successful in it and ask them how they did it. In Europe, Oh my goodness, my brain is frying out. I can send it to you. My goodness, I can't remember his name right now.
Is it the person who did Pain with Anderson? Is it the Anderson one? No, sorry.
No, he did it with Panhofer, who was a dance therapist. He's a researcher. Oh my goodness, I fight with him all the time and I can't remember his name. But he gets a lot of funding. He calls it body-oriented psychotherapy. No. Anyway, he does get a lot of funding, and he is a full-time researcher, so he would know how to kind of get around those things. He's in Europe, so it's a different different terminology, different angle, different approach. Or to hook up with a researcher, have a discussion, find out, like, say, hey, what do you think of this? Somebody who's gotten funding, like, for instance, if to get NIH funding, there are a lot of hoops to jump through. So you would want to find out about, like, how do you jump through the hoops, and to talk to somebody who's done it.
Yeah, thank you. And you just reminded me that one study we'd like to really highlight on our research committee is a work being done by Gina Ross and Danny, I'm blanking on his last name. He's from Israel, and he has an entire clinic devoted to somatic experiencing, and they're doing these large clinical trials now on PTSD and somatic experiencing. So certainly Europe has a much more broad-minded view of this, I think, and longer experience, but we are very much looking forward to trying to get that off the ground for their second round of funding.
Thank you for that, and I'm really excited about it. If you donate, it would make a very big difference, because we're at a place where that funding is ready to go and people are ready to do it. And if they had the money, we could have the research done tomorrow. So I'm very excited about that. Yeah. On your broad question about how to get funding, that's kind of how I wrote my chapter, was how do you write a regular research study from an embodied perspective and make sure you incorporate it in the general design processes. So on one level, none of the things that we would write in there would actually be problematic. You would just make sure that when you looked at your research question, you're asking the right question. So an example of this is there's a great study on mice. Apparently I'm having a rat day today, where there's a great study on rats in the 1980s who were exposed to cocaine and would use cocaine till they die. We all know this one, right? And what happened was policy was related to that to be quote unquote tough on drugs. Now, we all recognize that this was, at that point, was dog whistle politics and a bunch of other things that were going on. But the tough on drugs policy was fundamentally based on a study that had a disembodied mouse. It had a rat. It had a mouse that was, or it was actually a mouse in that study. It was a mouse that was in a cage with a bottle of cocaine water and nothing else to do. The wild thing is that if you put a mouse in a bottle of water with cocaine water in their cage, but a good life for a mouse, it actually isn't bad at all. And they tend to not use cocaine that much and have a little sip of it and then go off and have better things in their life than cocaine use. And so when you look at the studies of cocaine, what the real study was, not the actual research, not the question they said they were answering, which is exposure. They thought they were asking, what is it like if you give full exposure to cocaine? The real research question they were asking is, what is it like in an under-resourced, socially isolated, deprived environment to give somebody full access to cocaine? Now, that is a very different question. But if you look at a study from an embodied perspective, you have to ask the question in the right way. And when you do that, you get better answers. So whether or not the NIH realizes you're running this filter on your work, you can do it in a way that deepens the work itself. Are there other questions? I can't see them.
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing any other questions. If we have time for one or two more.
Can I ask for can we do the final poll then? Dion, would you do the third poll?
So poll number 3 says, what kind of support would help you include embodiment in your research design process? This is multiple choice. I don't know if this is a click all that apply or pick one, but consultation, protocol writing support, mentorship and or support, and research collaborative study group. And the hosts and panelists cannot vote. So I can't test whether it's a check all that apply or check one. It says multiple choice. Michael, do you know if that's, you can check all that apply?
I think it's probably multiple choice because I forgot to specify it. I would
Oh,
probably
okay.
default.
Oh, someone just said you can check multiple. All right.
Thank you, Dion, for being ahead of us, and or Rebecca for being ahead of us and getting it right despite her not saying it.
Yeah. So I just want to say, as we're sort of coming to the close of this, I will be reporting out these results in a moment, but we really appreciate all of the groundbreaking work, Jennifer, that you and Michael are doing. Your book is amazing. I highly recommend it.
That's very
Just,
kind.
I'm a longtime researcher myself, and what I find from this research committee work is that there is so much available to us, so much support, and so many great ideas. If you just take one question that we go through on our meetings, we could be sitting all day and having very rich dialogue around a specific question. And so your answers to these questions on the polls will be really helpful for us to figure out how to best organize our support for the community, how we can help get the research, really fully meshed and out there, because it's not just doing the research, it's really getting it to be accepted and publishable and really embraced by the general public. And I think also to that end, I want to just say that our world is at an inflection point with respect to trauma and our individual and collective experiences and our embodied experiences. So we really want to take advantage of this opportunity that we have, that's kind of a unique moment in time opportunity to really promote SE as a therapeutic modality, but also SE as research. So we may actually find some of the more traditional funding sources may be really receptive to this, since it's a universal global experience that we're all having.
We're being traumatized together, as it were. Thank you, Michelle. Dion, can we close that poll? Jennifer, while he's getting that ready, you want to just share any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, one just quick thought. Many years ago, when I was teaching a somatic psychology course, and I started collecting data from the students each week when they were doing their experientials. And I remember, like, I was nervous about it, and I was talking with a student, and I said to her, hey, this might even make you a better student. You'll focus better, and da da da. I was just making stuff up and she looked at me and she said, "Better student? This makes me a better person." Mm-hmm. So sitting here today, many years later, it's worth studying, and it's worth bringing to the light and bringing into however we do it, whether it's into the mainstream but it's time.
Yeah,
it is time. And so these results, thank you, Jennifer, and that is exactly the point. We grow as people, and research then it has a place in service of the deepening of our humanity and deepening of our service to the wider community. Thank you, Dion, for getting this up and for being so flexible on this time. And I just wanted to highlight these results, that sense of that consultation, protocol writing would be helpful, but the big stuff is having a good collaborative where we can all get together and some real mentorship and support. And so we're going to work on those. We're going to bring this knowledge back to the committee that we generated today and help lead this forward. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, Jennifer, I am just so grateful to be with you in this, and I know we have lots of leadership forward, and maybe someday there will be people writing about how embodied validity is a vital part of research. It is my hope that they do. Yeah. And I'll just say, wherever you are, lean in together, and let's help make this world much more connected, much more whole, and use the insights from embodiment to deepen our ability to be together in this world. And I'm really looking forward to all the growth that the insights and inspiration we generated together did today. Michelle, do you want to close this out from
great. I just want to say thank you so much to both of you, Michael and Jennifer, to our tech support, Madeline and Dion and Rebecca, and to all of you who participated in the webinar to make this really such an interesting hour and a half. I know we could go on for much longer time on all of this, but thank you so much, and we hope to see you again on our next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you both.